and gentlemen, welcome you all to the Conference Workshop 1 with an exciting theme, Cracking the Code, publishing in top-tier international journals. We have with us our esteemed speaker for this workshop, Dr. Tathagata Ghosh, Professor and Associate Dean, TAPMI, Manipal. I request Professor and Conference Convener, Dr. Manipal to escort the esteemed guest onto the dais. Speaker for today's workshop, Dr. Tathagata Ghosh. He is an accomplished professional with over 14 years of diverse experience in both corporate and academic settings. He is currently serving as a professor of marketing at TAPMI, Manipal. He brings a wealth of expertise in areas such as marketing management, marketing analytics, CRM, and marketing research. With a background that includes a PhD and a previous roles as an associate professor and research analyst, Dr. Ghosh has established himself as a notable figure in the field. His research focuses on digital marketing, advertising research, and destination branding, as evidenced by numerous publications in prestigious international journals. Additionally, his commitment to knowledge dissemination is reflected in his role as a reviewer for esteemed international journals and his regular felicitation of workshops and executive education courses on marketing research, statistical tools, and marketing analytics. We are extremely delighted to have you here, sir. A hearty welcome to you. I request Omkar to florally welcome our esteemed guest, Dr. Tathagata Ghosh. Kindly note this session will go up to 7 p.m. sharp. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everyone. So, thank you very much, and I thank the entire organizing committee as well as Professor Gururaj Kiriyur for inviting me. So, when sir told me that Tathagat, there is a conference workshop that we are planning for, will you please come and give a talk on that, I was more than happy and excited at the same time. So, it is my privilege to be here and share my experiences. So, I will have a presentation which is there. Actually, there is a folder in which I have kept some files. I need to open that. Thank you. Great. So this will not be a presentation. This will be a very good conversation, rich conversation. Please stop me whenever you have any questions, any doubt, any debate, any inputs you want to give me, so that we can have a very enriching discussion. So I thought that initially maybe half an hour can be kept toward the end. Obviously there will be separate time for Q&A, but at any point in time, if you think that some clarification is required or some inputs are required, please do share. So I will start with a question rather, that why publish? As academicians, what is the need for us to publish papers, and specifically papers in top tier leading international journals of different domains? So we are publishing for different reasons. The first reason and the most important one is creating knowledge, so that as academicians, as good educators, we can create that knowledge and share that knowledge in the class, what we call as research-led teaching. In some cases it could be research-led teaching as educators, as industry practitioners, those who are doing PhD or publishing in papers, they are doing that for solving managerial problems and disseminate that knowledge, whatever that knowledge has been developed, disseminate that knowledge, cater that knowledge to another group of people who are not so well versed with that knowledge. So obviously that is the number one reason why we should do good research and publish them in top tier journals. The second one, and equally important, is solve real life managerial problems. So let me go to that first link. There is an arrow, if you can keep that. So if you look at this paper, very well known paper by Fama and French, the capital asset pricing model, theories and evidence. If you look at that paper, it is a new knowledge. When capital asset pricing model came, the CAPM model came, there was a lot of debate initially, and that debate still continues to understand whether this model actually works in the real life or not, whether the set of conditions for which this model has to work, whether those conditions really exist in the real life or not, the way securities are priced, and the way the pricing of the security leads to profitability of the firm, profitability of a stockbroker, whether those works or not. But keeping those debates aside, this is pure knowledge. Great understanding for the readers to understand how securities can be priced. What is the ideal scenario, how securities could be priced. Another example from the marketing domain is a great paper by JKSHIM, where he is talking about a review of buyer behavior. This paper was published in Management Science. So I had the privilege of talking to JKSHIM personally, one-to-one, few years back, where we were all inquisitive of specifically this paper, because this paper was a direct output of his PhD work. In 1967, when this paper was published, there were no software, no databases, everything was manual, collecting data, going to the library, even in US, right? And in this paper, he has reviewed 363 articles back in 1967, where he is talking about, again, how we make choices. As consumers, how we make choices, why we behave the way we behave. And that is pure knowledge. Understanding why we make certain decisions, why we choose to buy or do certain things as consumers. So that is this paper is talking about, and was published in Management Science. The third one, again, a great paper by David Acker, which is the value of brand equity, published in Journal of Business Strategy, is nothing but new knowledge that the world did not know earlier. Maybe marketers and managers, people have been using brand equity or something similar of the sort, but David Acker in this paper told what is brand equity. He told that by brand equity we mean the added value or the prestige attached with the brand, manifested through different forms of consumer behavior. For example, positive word of mouth, willingness to wait for the brand loyalty, right? But brand equity was new knowledge that was developed, that was catered, and that became immensely beneficial for academics and for the industry for the decades to come. You can click the link. The back, bottom back. Yeah. So obviously creating new knowledge is the first reason why we should publish. The second one is solving managerial problems. And by managerial problems we mean the real ones. So are there any non-real problems? maybe, who knows, maybe we can, magnify the problem and try to make them very realistic. But by real ones we mean some problems that the managers, the industry is very, very curious and interesting, or rather to say, desperate to seek answers to. Something that is bothering them for decades maybe, but the answer is not right there out yet. So for that, academics and publications and papers, research is very, very important, that will help us understand and solve those real life managerial problems. Again, if you click the tableau. So here, I am taking two papers. One is the construal level theory and the consumer behavior paper. Another is a classic paper by Zetmal and Berry and Parashuraman, the surf coil model. And this paper as well, a multi-item scale for assessing electronic service quality. Specifically, if you look at these two papers, surf coil and the e-surf coil scale, these are papers not just for creating and disseminating knowledge like the previous three papers at the top, but surf coil again was developed just to solve managerial problems like how to assess the quality of intangible services. Because by products, when we mean physical tangible products, we can touch them, feel them, right? And we can understand their quality even before buying, what we also call as such products, or maybe even after buying, such as credence products. But specifically for intangible services, there are no such specific measurement tools, and service providers were always falling short of the expectations of their consumers. So consumers were using services, they were sometimes, in some cases they were liking it, in some cases they were not liking it. When they were liking it, no problem, but when they were not liking it, they were simply stopping or discontinuing the services. In such a case, it became essential for the marketers to understand how to assess service quality. And this paper has been cited more by managerial researchers rather than pure academicians. Same is the case for the ES qual-cal, where everything became electronic over a period of time, let's say from the end 1990s or end of the previous century and then beginning of 2000. A lot of things were becoming mainstream services which were used to support, which were provided through physical platforms now became electronic, and therefore understanding whether the dimensions of service quality also changes. So that became an important question for the managers, and therefore this paper came. And again, another paper which I found solves real life managerial problem, published in Business Horizon, top journal, where we say how to increase employee loyalty while you downsize. Very pertinent question, right? So those sort of papers are not only serving the purpose of knowledge development and dissemination, but more importantly solving critical managerial problems. And therefore, we should continue the practice of publishing in top tier journals. If you go back to the previous, by taking the, yeah. Third one is definitely research-led teaching. As academics, as faculty mentors of business schools, one of the responsibilities is not only give them wider perspectives of decision-making abilities in our students, but also bring to them in terms of what is happening, contemporary research in specific domains. So that is what we call as research-led teaching. I try to do that most of the time, wherever possible, applicable. And I try to bring some of the elements of research. Let's say I'm taking a class on, let's say, branding. I would definitely tell some papers, at least the idea, the essence. Maybe may not be I'll give one complete research paper to read and then solve the problem, but rather telling them nuances of something that is going on in the domain of, let's say, brand equity, or something that is happening in the concept of brand resonance model, right? And beautiful research has been done there, so that is what I refer to as research-led teaching. And therefore we need to publish. Many times I have brought my own research papers in the classroom and giving them interesting stories. And the students also like that. They appreciate it. More than liking, they appreciate, they understand the need to, maybe get acquainted with contemporary research. The fourth one, definitely for career growth. And that is more of transactional, I understand, but it is also important at the same time that as academics, we grow in our career, and one of the avenues to do so is not only through teaching and institutional service, but definitely through research as well. And the last one is publish or perish. When I started, I did my PhD from 2010 to 14. When I did this, I used to hear this, but never experienced this, but gradually we are experiencing this. right? So unless you publish, you are not, you are replaceable, very much replaceable, right? I'm not saying that it is, so we're not going into the debate whether it's good or bad, whether one needs to be replaced if he or she is not publishing. That debate is not important here, but the fact is important that unless we publish, it is not going to be good for our career. So let's talk about some concerns about publication, because that is the topic of the day. The first big concern that many of you might have seen is, while targeting top journals, is desk rejections, and that too repeated. That's the first big symptom that there is something wrong with the way you are approaching to write that paper. Right? It could be a problem with the paper, it could be simply your misfortune, so the chance is meager, or it could be the way you are identifying the journal, or maybe something else. But desk rejections, and that to repeated desk rejections, I have got many. It is a clear symptom that there is something wrong and that you need to work upon quickly. That is the first problem. Second one is no revise and resubmit. So the paper goes for, clears the desk, for example, it reaches to a bunch of reviewers, and in some case 3 reviewers and an associate editor, and they give a beautiful explanation of why your paper needs to be rejected. The review is big, the review is rich, but the particular outcome is negative. So you do not get the chance to revise it and work upon that, and at least send to that journal. Maybe you can work on those comments and send it to another journal, but that journal, for that paper, the door is closed permanently. In some cases it is rejection and resubmit, but the door is still open. But those sort of problems where you see a rejection and resubmit, and we don't call them RNR as such, because RNR is revise and resubmit. Rejection and resubmit is still, there is some chance, but for rejection and resubmit, the problem is more, I'll say, preliminary. Maybe something with the structure of the paper, or maybe with the word count of the paper, or maybe some citation related issues, right? But when you do not get any RNR, another problem. Definitely the associated problem is loss of interest, energy, time, money, effort, all those are wasted. And there are thousands of situations, lakhs maybe, in the world, alone in India let's say, where we self the paper permanently, and we call it a file drawer problem. We put it in the file drawer and we never think of working on that paper anymore, because you have wasted, you have squeezed the last drop of blood of yours on that paper, and the moment you think of rewriting that paper, there is a lot of negative energy, negativity, right? And therefore you do not think of working on that paper anymore. That paper stays there in your desktop forever. There is no positive outcome. Career growth becomes sluggish. Even getting the first job becomes tough. So these are the problems. Now let's see how to identify research gaps. So today, the way I have structured my presentation is again from my own experience, is that I have attended a lot of workshops related to how to publish in top tier journals. But to be honest, very honest at this stage, I have been grossly disappointed with the way I have received the presentation. So I have tried to keep it little granular, rather than talking at a 30,000 feet view above the ground, where I talk at a very broader level, kind of philosophizing things. I have not tried to philosophize things. I have tried to make it little more granular, nuanced, and try to present things at a very nut and bolt level, and therefore it will perhaps help you as well. So I'll start with how to identify research gaps, and is the research gap publishable? And by publishable, I mean publishable in top tier journals. So my first question to you, and this is an open stage as I'm telling you, whatever you have in mind, please share. What is a publishable research gap? Anybody would like to comment on that? What is a publishable research gap in a top tier journal?
We trace the trajectory of the particular research work.
Definitely, sir.
And find that something has not been addressed, and we would like to address that.
Yes, definitely. Something that we have not thought of or nobody has worked on that gap before, is a publishable research gap. Okay, any more comments on that?
Which would have
Exist but not
scope.
relevance.
Yes, definitely.
If you have any relevance for the current contemporary situation, it might be irrelevant.
Definitely.
There'll be scope for that gap internationally, which is acceptable globally.
Okay.
There should be scope for that.
Okay,
kind
so
of-
whether it's acceptable, whether it's contemporary, whether it shows a research trajectory, the journey the researcher has passed through while writing that paper, right? I have summarized everything as saying the gap must be critical. Right? So obviously the next question is, what is the critical gap? Because I have heard this term. My mentor has told me, my colleagues keep on telling me that the gap has to be very, very critical, big, important, right? But what is a critical gap? That people do not normally share. So if somebody shares what is a critical gap, people say the gap has to have solid theoretical contribution. As if there are 3 stages of theoretical contribution: solid, liquid and gaseous. Right? It has to be solid, definitely. But then again the next question is, what is a solid gap? Specifically, theoretically. Right? So here, again, I am trying to give you a little more nuanced view of what I understood from my research journey so far as a solid theoretical gap. By developing new constructs, a gap that develops new constructs and explains new phenomena. So if your research is doing that, if you are developing a new construct that has not been developed earlier, or you are explaining something new, the phenomena is new, that is something what we will attribute to as solid. So if you can click that arrow. So some examples again, I'll try to give you so that you understand or relate to very quickly. If you look at this paper, Conceptualizing, Measuring and Managing Customer-Based Brand Equity, published in Journal of Marketing. Before this paper, we only knew one form of brand equity, which is brand equity as perceived by the marketers themselves. Because by brand equity we mean prestige, and who knows more than the marketer himself how prestigious my brand is. But when Kelvin Lane Keller said that there is something beyond marketer-based brand equity, and brand equity is not just what the marketer thinks of his brand, but more than what consumers think of the brand, that is the truest form, not the giver but the taker. From that perspective we have to understand that was an eye-opener for everybody, and that was a new construct. So that's what he developed as a customer-based brand equity. Or this, look at this paper, Service Dominant Logic, Continuing the Evolution. Brilliant paper by Vargo and Lush, where we used to say that there are 2 types of things that we sell. Either it has to be a physical, tangible goods, or it has to be a service, right? And we still teach that in services marketing. And there is a goods to service continuum that we teach, that students happily accept, and we also happily accept. But in this paper, if you read, where Vargo and Lush is saying in Journal of Academy of Marketing Science, that there is nothing called goods that we sell. Everything that we sell, everything that has a value is only service. And that was new. That was a new phenomenon. And that was published in Journal of Marketing Science, Academy of Marketing Science. And they're saying, just to give you an example, that this is not a slide changer. If you think this is a slide changer, you are thinking from a goods dominant logic which is not very strong. Rather, if you think that this is a way, or this is a device that makes my job easier of presenting, that is a service which is intangible. So service dominant logic basically is saying that the goods are just a means, goods are just a means to an end. The end is always intangible. So salt is a goods, but salt ultimately eventually increases the taste of the food, and the taste of the food is intangible, right? So that was new, and that therefore this paper got published in top journal. Or for that matter, if you look at this paper, explaining a new phenomena, the pet exposure effect. I recently read this paper, exploring the differential impact of dogs versus cats on consumers' mindset. So maybe if I would have not told the name of the journal, it would be ridiculous for many of us to think, is it really important question to understand, right? But when I say it's published in Journal of Marketing, the best in the world, so far the domain of marketing is concerned, then you maybe have to think twice and then we read this paper, right? And there we are talking about, consumers who have dogs or dog owners versus cat owners, how the traits of the animals are also transferred to the person, the owner himself, not the other way around. And how we perceive goods, right? How we see the benefits, start looking at the benefits of the goods or the values of the goods differently. A dog owner versus a cat owner. Then there is something new, right? So that's explaining a new phenomenon. If you can click the back arrow. So obviously the first one is by developing new constructs and new phenomena. So I can ask myself whether my paper is actually adding to that. Second is by informing and extending a theory with contradictory findings. Something that is contradictory. Maybe you are explaining the same old phenomena, but now you are saying something that is completely opposite to what the body of knowledge says, past body of knowledge says. So if you click that again. Just two examples I have given. This one, many of you might have read it. Beyond Bannon and Kenny, Statistical Mediation Analysis is a technical paper by Andrew Hayes. And he's talking about, Bannon and Kenny basically talks about how to test for moderation and mediation related effects. And this paper, published in 1986, has more than 15,000 citations. And Andrew Hayes came up with this paper in 2009, and look at the title of the paper, right? Beyond Bannon and Kenny. And this paper, he's saying that the way Bannon and Kenny has tested mediation and moderation is not the best way. There is a better way, and that way is something we call as process, right? So and that's why he's solving something or telling something with contradictory views. Therefore, I have given this paper, though very technical in nature. Look at this, how experience variety shapes post-purchase product evaluation, published in Journal of Marketing Research, where this paper is talking about how variety of experiences, let's say I have bought a shoe, my friend has also bought a shoe, let's say a sneaker. I use the shoe mostly for similar type of things, walking my dog, walking to the shopping mall and walking to my office, while my friend who has also bought a sneaker has a very different set or larger variety of experiences, let's say walking your dog, going to the airport, driving his car and playing golf. So he wears the same pair of sneakers in a multiple variety of experiences as compared to me. And this paper is trying to understand how variety of experiences impact post-purchase evaluation. And this paper says something very contradictory. Normally it is known that if there is more variety in a product or more variety in a retail shop, more variety in your choices, consumers evaluate those products or those retail stores more positively. Because by general, our tendency is variety seeking, what we call as variety seeking behavior. And larger the variety I find in something, more is the better is the, or higher is the chance that I rate it more positively. But this paper is saying something very contradictory, saying that larger variety of experiences reduces post-purchase evaluation. And they are talking about some mechanisms to test that and has proven it. Right? How they have proven it, that's not important. But this paper got published perhaps is because they are showing something absolutely contradictory. Right? You can click that. Back arrow. By solving prevalent academic debates, and again, if you can, sorry for that. So if you look at that, this paper, Pioneer Advantage, Marketing Logic or Marketing Legend. So there has been a perennial debate in the domain of marketing, or just, in a sense that we say whether first movers actually get an advantage. And there are two schools of thought. One school of thought says pioneers or first movers actually indeed get advantage because they are the first to enter, first to tap the market, and if they do something correctly, they will get actually a larger market share and they will become impregnable. Something of that sort. But again, there's another school of thought that says that there are free riders or there are late entrants who can actually leapfrog pioneers, and they can ride on the technology the pioneer has built and get the second mover or the third mover or the fourth mover advantage. So which of these logic are correct? Two logic. And that is a perennial debate that they are solving. So if your paper is solving something which is very, very debatable, then there's a high chance that the paper will get published in a top journal. Much easier said than done, we all understand that, but again, just to give you my views on this. Again, if you can go back. By developing new nomological connections, and this is something that I have tried to do in one of my paper, and I'll tell you some of the other ways to create a solid gap, so solid research contribution, by setting boundary conditions when and where the theory works, and by validating a theory in unrelated context. So these are all 6 ways to, whenever you do either one or some of these 6, all 6 are not possible in a paper, but maybe as many as possible. If your paper is doing that, then the gap is solid. So let's quickly look into the new nomological connections. So let's say this paper that I have published in, this is straight from my PhD, winning versus not losing, exploring the effects of in-game advertising, outcomes and its effectiveness, published in Journal of Interactive Marketing. And this paper is talking about a new connection, a new theoretical connection, a linkage between, there is something called in-game advertising. Just to give you a very quick overview of this paper, in-game advertising are all those computer games where you see a brand name included in it, something what we call as product placement in movies as well, right? So for example, Shah Rukh Khan you see entering a KFC store, it becomes an advertisement in a very subtle manner in the movie itself. Similarly, if you are playing a car racing game and you see MRF logo on the racing track, that's called an in-game advertising. So I tried to examine a very novel theoretical connection. For example, if consumers or players win or lose the game, one set of players are winning, another set of players are losing, does it impact consumer related outcomes? Game attitude, brand attitude, memory of the brands placed in the game, so on and so forth. And perhaps that was something new that was not tested before. New nomological connections, that is winning versus losing, or game outcomes and the impact of game outcomes on memory. That was a new connection, theoretical linkage that nobody has tested before, and perhaps that was why it was published. Again, another example of let's say, by setting boundary conditions. Just to give you some examples of setting boundary conditions. Boundary conditions basically mean, in easy language, moderators. So very, very important in all top tier journals want to know when a certain relationship will work, when it will not work, and that's where we want to set the boundary conditions. For example, if you look at this paper, cause marketing effectiveness and the moderating role of price discount, published in Journal of Marketing, or service quality and satisfaction, the moderating role of value, and brand logos versus brand names, again one more paper of mine, a comparison of the memory effects of textual versus pictorial brand elements placed in computer games, where we take game platform, where you play the game, either you play the game in a mobile or you play the game in a PC, does it moderate or is it a boundary condition in a certain context? That is where we published. And another one, the last one is something testing in an unrelated context, testing a theory in an unrelated context, that is also a good gap. For example, this is a paper, Caffeine's Effect on Consumer Spending, Journal of Marketing, where they use a theory, a prior theory, the theory of energetic arousal, as they call it, and they are using that theory, but they are using in a very unrelated context called caffeine consumption. So you might have seen that in big malls, there are coffee stores. So when we drink coffee from that store and immediately go for shopping, or it could be an online shopping in your home, many of us could be drinking tea or coffee or beverages, and which is high on caffeine. How does it impact our spending? What sort of products we buy? Whether this impact is attenuated or emphasized for hedonic versus utilitarian products, etc. Right? So testing something in a very unrelated context. So if you are doing any one of those, then your paper has a solid gap. Obviously, that is what we call a solid gap, and the thing that I missed here is a gap that solves real life and important managerial problems, which was also told by some of you, that the gap has to be contemporary, the gap has to have, must be solving some managerial problem. My personal experience suggests, from the rejection that I have got, is this point, that is the managerial problem or a point, that is more easy to address. Normally as researchers, we try to keep this aspect in mind, that what is the managerial problem I am solving. But many a times, I have got rejections because my paper did not have solid theoretical contribution. And therefore I have emphasized more on that rather than this one. This is given. This we understand as educators as well as researchers that the problem has to be interesting to the manager as well. Any questions at this stage?
One question.
Yes, sir.
You say that the papers are rejected because they say that we have solid theoretical foundations. So is it that the way you build your hypothesis is the problem, because you have theoretical foundations, or you just mean that it doesn't contribute to theory?
So contributing to the theory is more of a problem. Even if you are solving the hypothesis and the logic to that hypothesis is grounded in theory, is it extending something? Is it extending the theory? Is it enriching or telling something new about what we know already know? Is it building on top of that? If those questions are, you are or I am little hazy on that, then that paper is going to suffer from theoretical contribution.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. So let's move on to the next part. What is not a critical gap? Right, and it is perhaps not exactly opposite of what I told us what is a critical gap, and therefore I have kept a separate slide on that. So what I understood, and please correct me if I am wrong, is addition or replacement of few variables to an existing theoretical framework is not a critical gap. Sometimes we drop some independent variables, add something new, or replace out of 5 independent variables, drop 2, add 2 new, and then my mediator and the outcome variable are still the same, right? Or the research question perhaps is the same, but by dropping some variables may not be considered a significant gap. Extending a study in a new country, this I have seen a lot, right? And early career researchers mostly make those mistakes where they take, let's say, the theory of buyer behavior and says, sir, this paper was published in the context of USA. I'm trying to see whether this particular framework will also hold good in India. The answer, if to that answer is yes, then that's not a gap. If a theory holds good in US and the gap and the theory also holds good in India, that is not interesting. Rather, if you say this theory worked in US but it didn't work in India because of this country level variables, that's a gap. Then researchers will pay attention. Then the country specific data makes more sense to you. So if you have to ask that question, are you trying to confirm the previous studies, or are you going to negate and tell something over and above the previous findings? Right? Whatsoever, it may contradict the findings as well. That is a new gap. But simply extending in a new country perhaps would not be considered as a new gap or a strong theoretical gap. Validating a strong theory in a context of a new country, force fitting the relationship between two or more constructs with little managerial implications. This is also very common, right? Maybe you say the connection of the framework that you have developed, the hypotheses are very new, but the implications, managerial implications are low. Understanding that relationship between an independent and a dependent variable, or understanding the answer or getting an answer to the research question is not going to help managers, could be a reason why papers are rejected. Strong academic contributions but weak managerial implications. So if your paper is not addressing these, then the gap is not very critical. So that's the first part.
So,
Yep.
suppose there is already a paper which has identified few new concepts and they have tested a relationship in a particular sector, in a particular country. But if someone wants to test the relationship between those constructs or the variables with additional constructs in a different country and in a different sector with managerial implications and academic contributions, theoretical contributions, will this kind of paper hold good?
Maybe it will hold good, but you have to ensure that when you are adding more variables and you are testing it in a cross country or in a different country, there is something new in that. Maybe you are setting some boundary conditions.
Yes.
That this theory, not only I am adding or replacing some variables, but I am also including some country specific variables.
Yes.
Let's say Hofstede dimensions. I'm just giving an example.
Yeah.
Like in US, people are more individualistic in nature. In India, people are more collectivistic in nature. So this relationship, X impacts Y positively, is going to reverse in India, right? Then that paper will have a gap. But if you are simply extending or adding, and your ultimate conclusion is that the theory is validated in a new country, then perhaps that's not an impact. Because these theories by themselves are so robust in nature, right? When I talk about how to make your findings more robust, right? I have a separate slide on that. The way the research questions are validated and the hypotheses are validated, the way of validation is so robust, the authors themselves know that this model can be tested across multiple situations, it will still hold good.
Yeah, along with the situations, it is applicable to the worldwide problems. It is addressing the issues across the world, is something, a kind of contribution which we can show as original contribution. I had read this in some articles, so I'm just confirming with you.
Yes, definitely.
Fine. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So let's start with how to identify the right channel, another big problem which I have faced personally. And the boy who cried wolf, we all know the story, and we know that chance has a what we call as chance and luck factor that does not really work, right? So this unfortunate boy who did not think of the consequences of making a wrong decision was ultimately punished very badly, right? So let's see what sort of punishments we may get, right? So understand the weight of your, so how to choose the right channel? I think that one of the best ways is to understand the weight of your own paper correctly. You have to be very realistic to you. You are not answerable to anybody but only to yourself. And really ask yourself that, is this paper going to clear the desk of a certain journal because you have read and you know the standards of that journal? If the answer is a clear upfront yes, then only you should send it. Otherwise, if there is even a slightest element of doubt, you should not take a chance. Second one, start with your citations. I'm trying to identify right journals, so start with your citations, basically the base papers on which your research is built, and see where they are published. Right? Many a times, I will share one quick experience of mine. I published one paper in Journal of Electronic Commerce and Organization, which is an ABDCB. This paper was trying to identify something interesting, I thought, which is the way we know that unboxing videos in YouTube and product review YouTube, specifically unboxing videos on YouTube, have become very popular. And YouTube is considered an over-the-top medium as well, not just Netflix, because people watch more of YouTube rather than television sets, and brand managers target the social influencers and ask them to unbox their videos and give positive reviews. So I tried to understand that when a review is done and the way it is done, talking about the benefits versus talking about the attributes versus talking about the values, right? Value-based review or benefit-based review and attribute-based review, differences in these reviews, does it impact brand attitude? So those sort of things, and which was not tested before. And I started sending it from IGRM, which is an International Journal of Research in Marketing, and ABDC Ester, but ultimately ended with Journal of Electronic Commerce and Organization, which is ABDCB. And my biggest problem was I could not cite a single paper from a top-tier journal that is talking about similar sort of even product review videos on YouTube. Only one paper was there that I could cite, which was, I think, Journal of, it was published in some ABDCA journal that was talking about YouTube channel stickiness, right? How long we watch a YouTube channel, what are the factors that determine that. That was the only paper that was I could cite related to YouTube, and that was published in ABDCA. Remaining all papers were from B or C or Scopus. I'm not saying they are bad journals, but top journals expect that the papers you cite and use to reform your research question also has to be top, right? That's another problem that I have faced. Start with your citation, that's why I say, and see where they're, so if you think that your base papers are published in top tier journals, and the papers that on which you are trying to churn out papers you cite and use to reform your research question also has to be top. There's a high chance or good chance. That's another problem that I have faced. Think of start with your citation, that's why I say, and see where they're. Use a filtered approach rather than off-the-shelf approach. This I always use. Initially, I used to make mistake, pick up journals randomly, but I do not do it. So, for example, I normally work on the domain of different persuasive techniques on the internet. For example, meme marketing or native advertisement or gamification of advertisement, some stuff like that. So, if that is the thing I want to do, I will not pick up any random journal. Rather, I would start thinking, what are those journals that publish this sort of papers? And maybe then my choices will be limited. Let's say journal of advertising, journal of interactive marketing, internet research, electronic commerce research, and top good journals. And from those limited pool of journals, I will pick up one such journal where, again, similar papers have been published before. Not similar, but domains are similar. And that is the way I narrow down to a journal, rather than thinking of, let's try journal of advertising. It doesn't crack, let's try EJM, European Journal of Marketing, or let's try something else. Not like that. It has to be a very filtered approach. That's I try to use. Scan the journal articles to shortlist the right journal. Obviously, you need to know what sort of articles are published there. And it's a very good thing. This one is a good indicator that you can, and actually you can use this in your cover letter. And you can tell to the editor that Professor so-and-so, not only we think our paper meets the scope of your journal, but a careful scrutiny of your earlier articles clearly suggests that similar papers on this domain have been published. And you can name those papers. And then the reviewer is obliged, if your paper is of good quality, he is obliged to at least give you a reason why the paper is being desk rejected. And normally they would not. They would send it to the review board, right? But the paper has to meet other quality criteria as well. But if you give a strong reason, there will be no question or no email from the editor to you saying that, hey, your paper is good, but it does not fit the scope of our journal. And I'm sure many of you might have faced that sort of questions as well. Right? So no questions related to scope if you do this study. Right? Read the scope, it helps sometimes. Right? The scope of the journal is explicitly written in the website, and ask for help whenever required. It helps always. Right? Ask for help from your colleagues. Ask for help from the editor himself if you want to. Ask for help from whomsoever you feel comfortable to ask, and it will help you. Right? Most of the time I have got lot of help from my colleagues. He may not be a prolific researcher, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. Right? But if you think some help could be got, you at least try and share your problem. That's how I identify right journals. Start with ABDC, ends with ABS. ABDC is Australian Business Dunes Council, which is widely used in India and Europe, but ABS, Association of Business Schools, which is a much pruned list of journals, journal ranking, and the ranking is much more authentic than ABDC. Right? That's what this is my personal personal opinion, but ABS you can try and see where it is. ABS has 4 ranks: 4-star, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 ranking category, and you can try that right there. Do not overestimate while you send your paper. It's fatal. Underestimation is still better at an early career stage. I'm not saying short sale every time, but overestimation is fatal. It takes a lot of time, and the paper is rejected, and then you lose hope. And I have seen people paper rejected from an ester without slightest change. The paper is immediately sent to another ester, which nothing deadlier than this, right? Unless you have, and that's why I have written unless you know that the paper is definitely going to be rejected, you will not get any R&R, but at least you hope to get a good review, right? For example, I send the paper to IJRM, or let's say EJM, or let's say to JCP, or Journal of Consumer Psychology, and I know this paper will be rejected for sure, but I pray to God that at least it goes to the editor, to the reviewers. The reviewers rejects my paper, but says, hey, these are the problems that you have, and then I can work on those problems and send it to a lower level channel. So unless you have that goal, which is not very common always, you should not overestimate. Remember, fortune does not favor the brave, right? So that's the second topic. The third one is how to write introduction. Again, as I said, it will be a little more granular. So you'll find the similarity with this picture. The mistake that the ship did perhaps was thinking that this is the size of the ice mountain, but it was much larger than that, and that is why introductions are very important. And many times reviewers make mistakes, editors make mistakes. Maybe the paper becomes interesting and more interesting and more interesting as it unfolds, but the introduction does not give is not so exciting for the reviewer to read the entire paper. And therefore, I am writing this, that this is what, that part of the entire paper that reviewers reads very carefully. I review a lot of papers, and I will read this particularly very carefully to reject, right? And I'll just try to find out flaws in the introduction and say, tata, bye bye, khatam. Take most of your time to write the introduction. Therefore, you should write introduction toward the end, not at the beginning, and then rewrite it as many times as required, unless you are absolutely happy with it. So do not care about time. Do not hurry when you write the introduction. The entire paper is written, maybe you keep 15-20 days separately, or maybe a month only to write the introduction. I know 1 month for 700 words is perhaps what you are not ready to devote when there is pressure to publish, but that is important, because introduction can make or break your entire journey. Start reading the introduction. So how to write a good introduction? Start reading the introduction using a skeletal framing approach. Then make it a habit. This is my, again, nobody has told it, I have done it my way. So if you can please open introduction para 1. There is one paper, PDF, introductions para 1, something of that sort. Introduction paras 1. So let's say this paper, this is another paper which is published in Journal of Travel Research, which is an STAR journal, Medical Tourism Experience, Conceptualization, Scale Development, and no, not this one, I'm sorry, please, yeah, you go to donors. So why are donors more generous with time? Just please scroll. No, I'm sorry, please close this. Please close, please go to that folder again. 1 second. This one, SF approach example, yeah, I'm sorry. So here, let's say I'm reading this paper. What do I mean by skeletal framing approach? It has helped me quite a lot. So how experience variety shapes post-purchase product evaluation that we are talking about. Let's say I'm reading this paper, right? I make it a habit that I make a gist of every paragraph or every different thought blocks as I encounter them. So if you scroll, please scroll. So let's say, please scroll. Yes, please scroll. So let's say I have read the first paragraph, right? So imagine that you and your friend each recently bought the same pair of sneakers. You both use the speakers and in a variety of situations, etc. So if I have read this paragraph, I will summarize it. If you take your mouse cursor to that yellow first, this comment section here. So here, please click on that or maybe hover it. Please click that. Maybe double click it. Maybe. One more. It should. So basically, I'm making a note of that first para, right? Go to the next one, please. This block, yeah. Why studying about product usage experience is critical? That is what the next paragraph is talking about. Just making the summary, not for each paragraph, but for each thought block. And as you will see that a good introduction is like a story. It starts with something, then naturally flows and takes you to the research question and tells why addressing that research question is important, right? So if you can identify different thought blocks, different pastures of the introduction, and make a note of that, this is what I call as a skeletal framing approach of reading. For example, now I know that the first para is an anecdotal evidence of the research question. Second para is why studying about product usage experience is critical, that they are talking about. Please go to the third one. Yeah. Introduce the context. Now they're introducing the context of the study, variety of experiences that they're talking about. Please go to the next point, which is role of variety on consumers. They're talking about why studying the impact of variety on consumer behavior is important. If you scroll and go building the tension, now they're building the tension in the fifth para by contradicting with the past body of knowledge. And here they are saying, as I told you before, that more variety leads to lesser post-purchase evaluation, and then please scroll to the next page. And here I am talking about, go to the box there, what does this paper suggest and reveal, and in the last one I am talking about the structure of the paper, right? So that is the skeletal framing approach. How does it help me later? I will see a pattern, how introductions are written, right? And that pattern now I write it in my PPT. Please go to the PPT. Yeah. So here I am now saying this is a generic pattern that I use 99% of the time, and it works every time. At least nobody, no reviewer tells me that an introduction is choppy. Your introduction paragraphs are disjoint. There is no connection between one paragraph to the other paragraph. Each paragraph might be rich in itself, but the seamlessness is missing. Those sort of questions never come to me. Rarely do they come. This is the way I normally start. I set the context, phenomena, about the phenomena that I'm going to study, mostly through anecdotal evidence. I'll share one example after I complete all the paragraphs. So maybe a phenomena, give industry insights about that particular activity or that phenomena. Let's say you are talking about brand equity. You give an example of brand equity and then tell, how much money consumers, marketers are spending to build brand equity, stuff like that. Key research in the domain. You may take one more paragraph that will become your second paragraph to talk about what all research has been done on that. Second and the subsequent paragraph will be state the problem. Now you clearly say what is your problem, what sort of problems you are facing or you want to address in your study, and it should be very clear. In a sense, do not beat around the bush, come straight to the point and say, one perennial research problem in this domain of brand equity is not examining the impact of X on Y. You clearly state the problem. Absolutely, the minimum, the lesser number of words you use, the better it is for us, right? That's what I have understood. Third paragraph, maybe why addressing that problem is important, what attempts have been taken in this direction, what has not been studied. If you can emphasize that, specifically why addressing that problem is important, if you can showcase that in the third paragraph. Fourth paragraph, what is this paper addressing, right? How are they addressing it? So now you say this is a research question and I want to address the research question because it is important of these reasons, and then you say, okay, this is how I am addressing the research question. This is what we are actually studying. That is your fourth paragraph. Your fifth paragraph could be the academic contributions and managerial implications. I'm not sure, maybe most of you are already doing it, putting the academic contributions and the managerial implications up front in the introduction section. Many times I have missed it, and every time I have missed it, my paper has been rejected. Most of the time they have been rejected because reviewers do not have patience to go to the end of the paper and read the implications and the contributions. They want right at the beginning. And therefore, I dedicate one whole paragraph for academic contribution, another whole paragraph for managerial implication. And I clearly start the paragraph saying the major theoretical contributions are these: first, second, third, fourth, fifth. I know that when you write the academic contributions again later, it will be difficult for you because you have to tell the same story again in using different words. But now you can, expand that, because introduction you zip it, but you have to put it. So for managerial implications, sixth paragraph is optional, but I normally try to keep it where I give the structure of the paper. I say the remainder of the paper is as follows. First, we review relevant literature on gamification of advertising. Thereafter, we build hypotheses. Thereafter, we do 5 studies. And I say study 1 examines this, study 2 examines this, and then I say my paper closes like this. So structure of the paper. I always try to give this, start with a story, question, problem in the first paragraph itself. And if you can quickly, again, minimize this and go to that medical tourism paper. Just to go to the folder again, please. Let's say introduction paras 1. Yeah. So this paper was published by me and Shantanu. Please scroll. So here, just to give you a quick idea of what this paper is all about, 10 seconds elevator pitch. This paper is developing a new construct called medical tourism experience, which is a new phenomena. Lot of patients come to India, or we also do interstate travel. We go to different state, not only to take medical treatments, but after we are cured, and if the doctor permits, we also have a tour of the local place. So it's tourism, it's healthcare plus tourism that many consumers have been doing. Specifically, it happens more in international travels, and so it has two dimensions and two different nature of services. So we tried to develop a new construct, trying to understand what are the dimensions or what are the attributes of a good medical tourism experience, and we developed a scale. Perhaps this was new. So if you look at my first paragraph, just to give you what we mean by a story, please scroll. So I am writing, just I'll read it, I know it might be a little boring, but I'll still read it. Minati Ghosh, a senior administrative officer in the retail bank in New York, was suffering from osteoporosis, and then she consulted several doctors in New York, and they suggested a larger cost. Due to the enormous expenditure, Minati decided to come to India, specifically in Manipal, and she traveled in India, got the treatment at much lesser cost, $7,200. After the doctors advised her to walk, she also had a brief yet refreshing tour of the nearby places around Manipal with her family. Minati returned to New York 3 months later in an extremely satisfied state of mind and boastfully shared the experiences with her colleagues. Right? So I have set the phenomena of what I am trying to study, medical tourism experience, through an anecdote. So what I understood is, the way, if you start a paper like this, if possible, not always, it creates interesting. It becomes interesting to the reviewer, because normally not all papers open like this. So they will say, Acha, what is this going on? What is the story he's talking about? And then maybe he will be inclined to read the next paragraph, and the next paragraph is written well, then perhaps he will read the entire introduction section, and maybe then read the rest of the paper, and then give the review, a positive review, hopefully. So in the next paragraph, I talk about what medical tourism experience is, and give them the definitions, and then talk about the industry estimates, key statistics, how much money is being spent, and then why it is important to understand medical tourism experience as a construct, the dimensions of experience, etc. Right? So that's how, what I say, a story. Please go back to the slides again. So if you look at this gentleman, Gerard Tellis, I'm not going to talk about him, but established top-notch researcher, and if you read some of his papers, in the first paragraph itself, or maybe in the title itself, he will put the research question. For example, I gave you one such paper, Marketing Pioneer Advantage, Marketing Legend or Marketing Logic, question mark. 70% of his papers, the question is in the first paragraph itself, and in an interrogative mark, with an interrogative mark. What would happen if this happens? Or what is the answer to this? Right? The question is out there at the beginning, loud and clear. So that is the way, and I have given, I can share this, and you can read some of the articles by Gerard Tellis. So that's all about the introduction. How to write the literature review? Identify your key theories, constructs, and domains. Right? And there's a 3 different things. Theories, again, you need to know what theories you are going to use. So you can have a section on theoretical underpinning, another section on the key constructs of your paper, and then the domains of your paper. So a theory, in my case, for example, would be the regulatory focus theory that I have used in my PhD. So I'll have a section of regulatory focus theory in my literature review. One more subsection of the literature review will be about the domain, which is gamification of advertising. And the third subdomain within the literature review will be some key constructs I'm going to use. Right? So those are the 3 subdomains I'll have. Show an evolution wherever possible. When you are writing a literature review, I try to show an evolution. How gamification of advertising literature started, how research on that domain started, how it progressed over a period of time, and what is the present and the most contemporary state of knowledge on that particular topic. If that evolution is there, then the flow is there, and the editor will love reading it. Unlike hopping to and forth, sometimes going back in 1960s, coming back in 2011, 1988, 2018, 1999, 2004, doesn't look good. But you may say, Prof, it may not be the case. It may not be always about choice to go in a sequence. If that is the case, please go ahead, but there has to be some story in the literature review as well. Therefore, it is important to synthesize, not report. I have learned the hard way Big journals hate mere reporting. Big journals hate paragraphs like Belk and Acker studied the impact of XYZ on ABC. They found that this happens, and they also found that no, that should not be the way a good literature is reviewed. That's not a good form of literature review. You may rather say that while Belk and Acker studied the impact of XYZ on this, one of the prime assumptions of their research was this, or one of the context in which they did this research was this, for this sort of audience. However, there is a dearth of understanding of this phenomena in a different context, something of that sort. Maybe you have to, by synthesizing I mean your own interpretation. You have read that literature, you have read that paper, I have read that paper. What is my overall takeaway? If I have to explain that to a student, and the best way to practice is tell that story to a student, then you have to tell it in a much more fascinating manner. Because students have nothing to do with research paper. They don't care much to what extent we publish, unless we make the story very interesting. So that is what I mean by synthesizing literature, not reviewing it. Say how you are going to use these extant studies in your research. So you have to build on those, not just report that. Be brief. And this I have learned from the first paper on Journal of Interactive Marketing that I did from my PhD. So I read a 2.5-page review only on regulatory focus theory, because I have read that theory to the farthest extent possible, right? And they said, TG, it's not important. I'm not interested in what regulatory focus theory does, because I can do it much better. I can learn it in a much rigorous way if I read E. Torrey Higgins or the author's own paper on regulatory focus. I'm not interested in that. Can you summarize in one paragraph what is regulatory focus theory and how are you going to use that theory in your research? Why that theory is important? And he just gave me, let's say, 400 words. Cut it down to 400 words and tell why the theory is important. So be brief. I know there is a lot of temptation because we are well versed with theories and we go on and on and on and on. That should not be the way what I understood literature has to be written. Pick up the right articles and then read them, right, while reviewing the literature. I have emphasized then read them because, again, I have seen a trend. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry to say that many researchers, mostly early career researchers, only read the abstract and review the paper, right, which should not be the case. It's fatal. Please do not paraphrase the abstract and say it's a review. Right? Maybe you do not need everything from the abstract. Maybe you do not need to bring all pastures of that paper in your review. Maybe you just need one key finding from that review on which you can build upon your story. Right? So that's why reading that paper is important. Avoid false citations and deliberate ignorance. I have not done the first one, I have done the second one. I must confess, deliberate ignorance. I knew that there is one paper that was also talking about the outcomes of playing a game, winning versus losing, on something else, but I thought, hey, let's suppress this, and if I show this, that there is a similar paper of this sort, my paper will be rejected. You know what? The reviewers themselves quoted that paper and said, Tathagata, you have missed out this paper, why don't you cite it? Rather, compare and contrast. Compare your study with that study and contrast how your study is different from that study. So do not ignore. If you know there is some paper that is interesting and that is important for you to cite, review, please do so. Right? That is what I mean by deliberate ignorance. False citations, again, dangerous. You might know already that somebody has not studied something, but you want to validate one sentence that A impacts B, but you are not getting any upfront citations. You cite XYZ et al. Because the nature of the paper of XYZ is similar to what you are citing. Right? That's the false citations. Reviewers do read those papers as well to see whether you are claiming whatever you are citing is correct or not. And if this is the case, they will simply reject your paper. Do not avoid including recent papers. Again, I am still learning. One of my papers is in review in Australasian Marketing Journal, and I have not cited recent papers. And as recent as 2023, the review, I did not bring the review letter, and that says, authors, please review recent papers. In bracket, they have mentioned 22, 23. And they have counted, and they have said, you have only included 3 papers in its present form of the manuscript, only 3 papers from this last 2 years. We need more papers. Right? So please cite more papers as new as the present year in which you are publishing. Cite papers from the journals you are writing for. Again, some journals want that. If they want it, you have to do it. Right? Build attention at the end. Very, very important that after the literature review, again you should emphasize the research gap. So that's about the literature review. Any questions?
When it comes to citation, whenever we adopt some scales, the developed scales of some constructs, are we supposed to cite the original developed scale, wherein it would have got modified? The other researchers would have modified it as per their requirement, and they would have used, and that has also got published, accepted. Now, whenever the new researcher is going to use the scale, are they supposed to cite that original scale or the new one?
I suggest do both.
Okay.
You can say, I'll give you an example. There are 2 versions of a scale called need for cognition, which is a trade variable. Need for cognition, the original scale has roughly 42 items.
Yeah.
And the pruned list, the shortened version of the need for cognition scale, has just only 11 items.
Right.
And there is a reason why 11 items from 42 items. And both these papers have been published in leading journals. So you can quickly say the original need for cognition scale was having 42 items and it was published by so and so. However, for our research, we are using the shortened version of the NFC scale for a reason, maybe a principle of parsimony, and therefore you go on. So the reason why you need to sometimes cite the original researcher is because telling from where the idea has been generated.
Okay.
That way you also pay respect to the idea generator rather than only the person who has modified that idea.
All right. So when it comes to introduction, is there more weightage if we start the latest papers published as cite the latest papers in the beginning? Is there any such things?
No, I don't think so. But while you are doing a review of the literature, then you should include somewhere the latest papers. Some of the papers needs to be recent. The sequence of whether you place it at the beginning of the literature or the end of the literature is not important. It is also not important that you have to include recent papers in the introduction, right? But in the literature review, you should definitely include recent papers. Some of them should be new.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
People are talking about research ethics. I have listened to some of the talks by these Elsevier journals. Do not send your paper to a journal which asks you to cite their own papers. This is one of the things which they are telling. Now, because I have also seen that some journals do not like their own papers to be cited in the papers that we are sending. But some journals would love that. But nowhere in the journal policy they would state these things. So how do we resolve this? Because at the time of sending the paper, if you do not know, what do we do?
The answer is simple that I follow. Again, it's like our choice to, if I want our paper in that specific journal that is asking me to cite their journal, then I would do it. I would not question, and these sort of comments mostly come from the reviewer, the editor. Unfortunately, the editor will say, over and above the comments given by the reviewer, that please include articles from our journal, and we know why they are saying so. They want to increase the site score of their journal, right? H index of their journal. If the author is really curious and keen to publish that paper in that journal, and you know that this could be a make and break, and normally these sort of things come in the later rounds, right? And sometimes said under conditional acceptance, right? And if the author says that it's a big cost of not doing so and getting rejected, then the author should do it, right? Though it is not perfectly ethical, right? And there is worse. Let me say that. Editors themselves ask their own papers to be cited, which we would not do. definitely there has to be a limit where we should stop. But explicitly I have got at least 3 such journals, I cannot name them, and I would not name them, let those ethics be kept to them, where they explicitly say, mention this. They will not say mention my papers, but they will say mention these papers, and they are written by the editor himself. All right. Cheap practices, unethical completely. There you can take a stern call of not doing so, but in some cases if you think that, but good journals, as you rightly said, sir, they will never demand those things from you, because they know that they are good, they know that it doesn't matter whether you or me or somebody else is citing their paper. If the journal is good enough, people will invariably cite it. So the bottom line is, it comes to the ball is on us. The ball is in our court, whether we want to be paying heeds to our own interest of publishing the paper in that journal, or not doing so, stopping, say, hey, I cannot do it. All right. So that call is to the author. Given that it's about the journal, given it's about the editor, definitely we should never pay any attention to those sort of requests and say it's not possible. And you do not say anything, rather you say we have reviewed, and in that review you do not, instead of going with a direct, what we call in marketing, frontal attack strategy, you say I have reviewed XYZ papers, and when the editor sees those papers, he immediately understands that his chosen list of papers are not there. Then it is again up to him to take a call whether to reject it or not. But this is rare, but happens. Any other question?
Strictly done on the SLR basis, systematic review, literature review. Some of the journals they are not accepting, I am told, because I have not experienced that. What is your opinion on that, systematic literature review, SLR?
So can you reframe the question? What is my take on?
Many of the, I have heard of the video cassettes and YouTube lectures from the renowned researchers saying that of late, some of the top-notch journals, they insist on systematic literature review, not just the one which we are doing already. They want
in an empirical paper?
Yeah, as well. But I'm not very sure whether is it true or otherwise. What is your opinion on that?
Frankly speaking, I have not, I may not be able to
because one of our papers we sent, they said no, review should be, you should follow SLR. They sent a comment and say rejected it during the second review.
What I understand is there are different forms of literature review, 7 types of literature review. Let's say systematic literature review is the highest form of literature review, mostly done in meta-analytic studies and meta-theoretical studies. Rest of all, including morphological analysis, which is a very high form of literature review, are semi-systematic. And in many cases, the review is unsystematic, right? So by systematic review, what I understand is kind of examining effect sizes or giving a more meta-theoretical perspectives. So in an empirical paper, the scope to do a systematic review is much less because it itself takes a lot of words. It takes a lot of effort. Would you have to do it? Why won't you publish that paper as a single systematic literature review paper, rather than include that review as a part of a literature review in an empirical paper? Right. I have not faced those sort of rejections, but maybe some editors may ask. What I understand by systematic literature review, maybe as I'm talking here, I think they may be interested in giving a holistic framework of the domain. Right? Maybe sort of independent variables studied, sort of mediator, sort of moderator, sort of outcome variables. So give instead of using words to explain, maybe give a review of the entire domain using a framework. If you can do that, then maybe it will pass the criteria of the review. Okay, so let's move on. Developing the hypothesis and the concepts. Hypothesis and the framework. Develop hypothesis, not propositions. Normally we call them hypothesis. Nobody makes these mistakes, but sometimes we call propositions. Propositions can be, you can call it proposition 1 instead of hypothesis 1, or P1 instead of H1, if those propositions are not going to be tested in that paper. If you are testing it, it becomes a hypothesis and no more a proposition. Too few or too many hypotheses are to be avoided. Right? Again, it's very prescriptive, which I should not. But too few means maybe 1 or 2, and too many such as more than 10. So ideal set of hypotheses I have in my paper is, let's say, between 3 to 5. Right? So if you have too few or too many, operation successful, patient died. Right? You proved what you wanted to prove, but then the paper got rejected. build your hypothesis keeping in mind the studies to be conducted later. Right? So when I frame my hypothesis, I'll give you an example later, that when I develop my hypothesis, I always keep in mind which hypothesis will be studied in or will be validated in which study. And I always have more than 2 studies in my paper. So I know hypothesis H1 will be studied in study 1, H1 will be again validated, the robustness of H1 will be validated in study 2, H2 and H3 are moderators which will be studied in study 3 and 4 respectively, and H5 is the mechanism or the mediator published, studied in, validated in study 5. Like that, if you can have a, if you can plan your hypothesis and the study and map them with studies, that's great. Provide the conceptual framework wherever possible with the hypothesis embedded into it. By conceptual framework, I mean the picture. Some journal articles you will see, many journal articles where pictures are not given. I prefer to give the picture, but because that gives a clear idea, quick idea, not a clear but a quick idea of what you are studying. High resolution images and a professional appeal in the pictures. So for example, this paper that published in Journal of Business Research, where again we did 3 studies and we clearly mentioned which hypothesis in which study, right? And this I give upfront after the literature review, because now the reviewers know, okay, study 1 is this, study 2 is this, study 3 is this. Another paper published in again Journal of Interactive Marketing recently, again we have done 2 studies here, study 1 and study 2 I have told how, which hypotheses are studied in which study. So that is clearly given. How to answer the research questions, studies and the details. Let's go into the empirical part now quickly. Studies in the paper. In general, how many studies do you conduct in research paper? Right, if that is the question asked to me 7-8 years back, I would say 1. Now I would say at least 3, right? Because that's the need of the hour, and single study papers are being often rejected. I have got rejections explicitly mentioned, your research question is good, but we do not accept single study papers, right? Some journals explicitly quote it. So obviously the need of the hour is, if you want to publish this in good journals, you need multiple studies in the same paper. So the question is, how will you frame multiple studies? So I have a plan for that I follow, which I'll share. So I ensure at least 2 studies, if not more. So in one of the papers that we are targeting to JCP, we have 7 studies in that paper. The data collection is already over, and we are framing it. So it's not the more the merrier, but there has to be a reason why you need 7 studies. That logic has to be there. But again, multiple study papers have a higher chance. So why multiple studies? What is the reason? First is robustness of the research. Robustness of the research process, the situation, stimuli, data, X impacts Y, right? That is what you want to establish. You do that in study 1, but there could be several reasons other than the way you have hypothesized that X impacts Y positively. It's not because of the reason you stated, but because of maybe something else that X impacts Y, but not the reason because of you stated. So you need to nullify those alternative explanations to make your claim more valid and say X impacts Y positively only because of this is the reason and no other reason. So that you study in study 2 or study 3, nullifying alternative explanations. Claiming claims or conclusions are replicable and decisions can be made. Sometimes studies are done, multiple studies are done. Let's say X impacts Y in India, but does X impact Y also in some other cross country? Or X impacts Y for a student cohort, but does it also work for early careers or working professionals? So you generalize. In multiple studies later, you generalize H1, right? Maybe you take one more study to generalize it. And you will see all good journals do that. All good journal articles do that. Study should build on top of the previous one. So study 2 should be built upon exactly where study 1 left. The study should not be, my paper got rejected because all studies in isolation, they looked good, but the studies were not building upon on top of each other. So study 2 was not building upon where study 1 left. By building upon, I mean study 2 is necessitated because of the fallacies of study 1. That has to be established. Right? That is what I say, building upon. So how to frame your studies? That's a research question. That's a critical question. How do I have multiple studies while I could validate what I wanted to validate in one study? Right? So let's say a hypothetical case. Basic relationship in study 1. X impacts Y, study 1. Study 2. This is a very generalized case. This is not a prescription, but this I try to follow for me. Process variables in study 2. X impacts Y, but is there any mediator in between that X impacts A and A impacts Y? That mediator I will include in study 2. In study 3, I will bring boundary conditions. X impacts Y, X impacts A and A impacts Y, under which situation? For which cohort? For what sort of moderators, situational variables, boundary conditions? That I will bring in study 3. Field experiment in study 4. Mostly I do experimental studies, and experimental studies means lab-based studies. The stimuli is prepared by me. Now, for example, I have developed an advertisement, a fictitious advertisement, and I have shown that to people. That is study 1 to 3. In study 4, I will pick up real ad and then showcase it. That's a field experiment which I will do in study 4. And study 5 I will do to nullify alternative explanations. By alternative explanations, as I am again saying, alternative explanations of the relationship between X impacts Y. You have said that X would impact Y positively because of a certain reason, based upon a certain theory. But there could be alternative theories as well. That you have to nullify in study 5. So this is a generic form mostly studied in or mostly done in Journal of Consumer Research and Journal of Marketing Research, Journal of Marketing as well. These 3 top journals will always have 4 or 5 or 6 studies because of this. Developing the hypothesis in the right way is the key. Do not frame big sentences. That is what I have learned for myself. So in this paper, I am not going again in details. So I have, maybe we can skip this. Why are donors more generous with time than money? Again, there is a paper on that. The role of, so they have used 7 studies here, right? So they try to give, now why donors are more friendly in giving more time, devote more time rather than devote more money. They have established the reasons for that through 7 studies. I will share those papers just to give you an idea of how they build on those studies. One study built on the other. Again, how does religion affect consumer response to failure and recovery of farms? Another beautiful paper in JCR that has 7 or 8 studies built on top of each other. So that's the literature review, studies done, and finally discussions. The summary, I find somehow this is the most difficult part to write, even more difficult than the introduction, because there is nothing new to tell, right? Because you have already told what you wanted to tell, and therefore it is difficult. So explain what results were achieved, not narrate. So you can say, in our study we understood the impact of winning or losing a game on brand memory because of these reasons. You can claim, you can reinstate the reasons why this impact happened, and then results that were not achieved and the underlying reasons. If some hypothesis had not been validated, what is the reason? You have to give 1 or 2 paragraphs on that. Focus on reinforcing the theories and their roles in the result. Focus on quality and not on length. Please come straight to the point in the discussion section. That is the discussion section all about. How to position the paper. So basically by positioning I mean academic contributions. Which debates does it resolve? I talked about some of the debates in the beginning. For example, or which theory does it extend, or what theory it validates, or is it a new nomological connection? So you can state all the 6 or some of the reasons I talked about in the introduction of this presentation. Which new direction does the paper set? So these are the ways you can write the introduction. Which all new debates does it create? That is another something that is very interesting. You can say this is the first research of its kind in this dimension, and it sets the tone for further research action, right? Something on that. Maybe you can dedicate 1 paragraph on that. That helps. Managerial implication, does your research findings solve the dilemma of the managers? How does it solve? And give specific examples. I always try to give specific examples that, let's say, I first say that this is what we have proven, and they say, let's say, and then say, and the manager can develop a game like this, and they want to have a memory like this, so on and so forth. So I give specific examples. How does your research findings help the policymaker or the stakeholder? Lot of research on sustainability and SDGs are happening these days. Very, very important. So you have enough scope to write on that. That's the thing. So that is all about how the paper has to be structured. Some remarks on that. Role of co-authors. Again, I have earned through my own experiences. Strengthening the research paper. Role of co-authors play a big role. Co-authors are very, very important, and many journals need multiple co-authors, though they will not state it explicitly. So co-authors are extremely important. Strengthening the research paper. They will strengthen your gap, they will strengthen our questions, theory, data analysis, etc. For example, this paper on Journal of Consumer Psychology that we are almost about to submit now, there's one Canadian professor, and when I presented the basic idea to him, he rejected everything about it. He said, this is not going to work, this framework has to be changed. This is not, because this guy, that particular gentleman, is already highly published. He has published similar papers, and therefore he actually helped us modify everything. Not all co-authors would do that, perhaps, but we were very fortunate and privileged that he gave that time, and we had several rounds of discussion. This idea started in 2021. Now the data is ready, and we are all ready to submit it another, let's say, a month's time. So it took almost more than 2.5 years to prepare that paper, and big credit, shout out goes to the, the co-author. He or she might be also writing some part of the paper, right? Selling the paper, and by selling I mean his popularity, right? The co-author is big enough, and desk rejections will not happen. So that is another big role that the co-authors may do it. So obviously co-authors will be important for all of these or some of these reasons. So whom to and how to select? Researchers with publishing experiences, and obviously co-authors has to have some publication experience and some additional criteria. Who can help you with data or analysis or writing, editing, and positioning the paper. That is with the actual work in the paper. That is how, if somebody is ready to do that, definitely you can rope him in or rope her in as a co-author. Or perhaps he will not do anything of the same domain, but a big name from the same domain you are working on. Or is an editor, associate editor, or reviewer of reputed journals. This is not a practice that I follow, but I have seen people following it. Right? So how to select? How to select co-authors? How means how to approach. That's the way, that's the point I'm trying to make here. Networks from conferences and colloquiums. But again, there are a lot of do's and don'ts in the networks. Networking, which I'll talk about quickly. Networking during faculty exchange programs. LinkedIn really helps. During FDPs or workshops or training. Email with the synopsis. I follow this one. Even if I've not done any one of these four, I'm very comfortable in only doing this and nothing else. I might be a complete stranger while writing an email, but if you have done some of the points there, maybe from the same domain, or maybe who can help you with the data, technically I try to follow this from the same domain, because I do not know before sending an invitation to become a co-author whether he will help me in the data or not, but at least I can get some good insights from him or her. I will email with the synopsis. This professor from Canada, we roped him in through an email only. It was a very customary formal email, and then we had more informal, more warm mail exchanges, and finally he told us to present the topic, and then he said, topic is interesting, I can be a part of that. So it works. Even if you do not know somebody from conferences, you can. Obviously conferences gives you a good talking point and say, dear Professor XYZ, I hope you remember me, we met in the conference. So that's a good, starting point, but this is important. The most important part is this, synopsis. I have not brought it, I can share. The synopsis has to be as good as an extended abstract in a top journal or in a top conference. The synopsis has to be that detailed, if possible with hypothesis in the synopsis. Because again, that co-author, that synopsis can make or break the chance of making somebody a co-author, right? If he's a big guy. Otherwise, if we are talking about same level of colleagues, then maybe you can even give a phone call and say, are you interested in having a meeting? And then let's talk about it. That can be possible. Mistakes that we make before onboarding somebody as a co-author: approach a big guy with a small background. Big name, and a lot of Indians, top researchers, staying outside, obviously with Indian origin. They are working with Indians, and that's good news for us. But we do not have a big context. Our context is small. By small, I mean we have not briefed about enough with the. So when I approach, will you be my co-author? I do not give enough background of why I am roping him in or trying to rope him in. There is no synopsis ready. The research question is also choppy. The concept is not even clear. It's in a very nascent stage in our mind. And then we send an email. Or we directly meet and say, can you be my co-author? That is not the best way if you are approaching a big guy. Approach at a wrong time, place, or both. Maybe in a dinner, in a conference. He is busy in eating and enjoying the place, the serenity of the place. And you are saying there's a paper. Idea, will you discuss? He'll say, we'll discuss, and he never does. Right? Approach without studying the person. This is very important. Right? You should study the person very well. If he's a big guy, small guy, whatever, big guy, definitely important. Please see what sort of papers, and this I have learned the hard way with my own mistakes. While this gentleman from this big guy from Canada actually we could rope him in, we sent this email to 8 people, one after the other, not parallelly, but sequentially. And the first 7 emails that we wrote were all top guys, but they were not from the same domain. We didn't study them much. Their larger domains were matching, maybe advertising, but not within specific to advertising what exactly. So most of them said, your topic is interesting, synopsis is interesting, but I do not work in this domain. And that is the reason why he rejected. I have all those emails, I can show that. Just not for an evidence, but to exactly make you feel the way the message he wanted to communicate. Approach for being a co-author directly, without any background. Again, maybe face to face. Approach the wrong guy, age, position, research background, intent. Right? This we do not know. This, we understand that it was a wrong choice after we have made the choice. Right? But you can come out of that co-authorship anytime you want. Mistakes we make after onboarding, commit on the paper too early. That we'll select this journal, that journal, 3 months from now, everything will be ready, so on and so forth. Continue to work despite the issues. Right? Difficult many times to come out, that I clearly understand. It has happened with me as well, but again, one project is over, you should take a serious call. Should I really work on another project with that person? Complain rather than quit. We always complain. We should not. Rather, if you think that the co-authorship is not working, please quit. Depend too much that he will do a review of our paper. Again, happened with me. I have depended too much on somebody, but ultimately he didn't do much or she didn't do much. Do not set that paper got published with that author, but not much. Do not set our expectations, right? So do not expect that everything will be, very rosy, fancy once he is onboarded or she is onboarded. Do not meet their expectations. They have a lot of expectations. I always follow this, who needs whom. Simple. If you think you need somebody, then you should definitely approach. But once you approach, you should know the checks and balances. Roles of conferences, again quickly, is national conferences are okay, but international conferences are much better. International means going outside India. For example, in marketing, we have the ACR, Association of Consumer Research, or the American Marketing Association, or maybe the American Psychological Association. Big conferences, big ideas being discussed. Plan your conferences well in advance. Please plan what all conferences you want to have, achieve, because accordingly you will work on the synopsis, the extended abstracts. Plan your activities during the conferences. I have seen a lot of people who plan whom he will meet, when he will meet. Those sort of planning also have seen, first-hand experience. Right? In one conference, one of my colleagues went, much senior colleague, and super networking guy, right? And he knew exactly when to meet whom on what occasion on what day. And by God's grace, everything fell in plan and they became co-authors later, right? So plan your activities, maybe not that detailed, but you should have a rough idea. Attend doctoral colloquiums for scholars, very, very important. Present your idea, get it heard by experienced people, and they will be able to tell their feedback, share their feedback. Attend as many conferences as possible in a year. Again, by as many I mean maybe even 10 in number. If your fund or your time and your effort is there, at least 2. I try to have at least 2 conferences in a year. Make acquaintances, but do not pitch. That is what I tell to myself. Make acquaintances so that when I write an email, maybe 3 months later or 4 months later, it will be enough to remember me, not my idea. I do not pitch. I do not pitch for co-authorship at all. I make acquaintances. That is my strategy, and it worked for me. Quickly, role of copy editing. If you think it may be required, it is required. If you think it is required, it may be required, it is actually required. And big journals require for copy editing services. I always try to take copy editing services from the same journal. For example, one of our paper was published in Journal of Marketing Management, which is an ABDCA journal in Taylor and Francis, and they wanted us to get it copy edited from Taylor and Francis itself. Copy editing services. It cost us 48,000 rupees. It was costly, but eventually it was a conditional acceptance. They said get it copy edited because there are problems. We got that corrected, and there were enough significant changes, and it got published. Use while submitting if article is good. Sometimes you can, even before knowing what would happen with that paper, you can use copy editing services if the article is really good, maybe the FT50s, and the journal is too tough to crack. Use at a later stage if journal is okay and asked, explicitly asked. Use services from same publishing house, which I always do. Use high-end services wherever required. High-end services means, they will say level 1, just grammars, level 2, sentence correction, stuff like that. So if possible, take high-end services. Do not fake, it is dangerous. Again, we say that we have done copy editing services, professional, and they ask for certificates, these journals, and there will be a certificate attached, right? That Taylor and Francis says, we have copied a journal article titled this for so and so author. That certificate has to be uploaded in the journal portal. And if you do not do it, the paper will be rejected, even at a conditional acceptance stage, because it's a matter of integrity. Now, some practical do's and don'ts. Read for myself, but read what? Right? That is what my guide always have told me, my co-authors have told me. But read what? Right? That perhaps not everybody tells. So what I have figured out for myself is systematic level reading 1. I definitely try to read articles on a regular basis from these top journals. These 6 journals I have chosen for myself. MS is not management science, it's marketing science. Journal of Marketing, Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Marketing Research, Marketing Science, Journal of Retailing, Journal of Consumer Psychology. Come what may, I will read at least the abstracts of the recent edition, recent issues. For example, systematic level 2. Even if you are missing this, you can do this. Articles from top 5 journals from your domain. That is also I sometimes try to do. My domain is, as I told you, I work on persuasive tools on the internet. So Journal of Interactive Marketing, MIS Quarterly, Journal of Advertising, Computers and Human Behavior, Electronic Commerce Research. These are top journals in my domain. I will read articles of what is happening, recent research happening in these journals, systematic level 2. You may also do systematic level 3. Maybe skip 1 and 2, but still do 3, and that 3 is this. Articles pertaining to your domain, online reviews and UGC, very specific, narrower domain. Now you are searching with keywords, right? What is happening in that specific research domain? And even level 4. Level 4 is again, if required, what I call as a time travel, cross-referencing basically. Compile what you read. I always try to compile what I read. If required, for systematic literature review, I do that. Prescribed MS Excel format. We all have some format, we can use that. Synthesize what you compiled, maybe a meta-theory or a meta-analysis or a semi-systematic literature review, if we want. And that's another big thing. I strongly suggest to young PhD scholars, because we read a lot of papers. As a scholar, I have read a lot of papers, and that entire reading goes to waste if I do not publish a semi-systematic literature review. So we should always, our first paper from the PhD should be a semi-systematic literature review. Absolutely important. Find out gaps from what you read and synthesized. Trying to identify a gap. I have a format in which I have a column specifically of what gap comes in my mind. I can share that format, those who are interested. And do's, how many of you keep a yearly target? How many of us keep an yearly target of journals? Maybe everyone. But how many of us keep a monthly target? Or a weekly plan, or even a daily routine? Right? It may sound ridiculous to you, maybe, that I keep a daily routine of, come what may, I will write 50 words for my research paper. If there is any research paper going on, I am writing in it, it is in a writing stage. 50 words. 50 words is too small, right? Just half of a small paragraph. 50 words means 1500 words a month, 3000 words in 2 months, 6000 words in 4 months, 7500 words in 5 months. So in 5 months my paper is ready. It can be that granular that I keep for myself. I try to follow it. In TAPMI, a lot of people say, कि आज का 50 word हो गया, it's done, right? So that's one. And discuss with your colleagues and experts regularly, that I do. Customize your paper for the journal, always. For example, the citations, the referencing, the format, right? Create a research pipeline, at least 3 papers, which are in R&R, not in submission stage, by R&R, that I plan for myself. And learn to say no in a lot of other things, which is difficult. I have not learned it yet, the last point. So just a meme on that, use of the time while writing a research paper. So this, very tempting, right? Don't read just abstract or the discussion or the conclusion. Don't miss your daily targets. In case you miss it, carry forward the work. So I have written 35 words, 15 words are left. Next day I will write 65 words instead of 50. I try to be that granular, and I try to maintain that as honestly as possible. Not every day it is possible, I will acknowledge it, but try to make it up. In fact, one thing that I have stopped doing is write, let's say, the entire introduction section, or write the entire literature review section, and then do nothing about that paper for the next 15 days, and again come back after 15 days to work on that. By that time, you have already forgotten what you have written. That's what I try to avoid. I may not write 50 words every day, but I'll try to sit with the paper at least thrice a week, if not read every day. Don't challenge the editor. I have done it myself, and I have again faced it. All sort of things I'm saying, it has happened with me. So one paper, I'll not name the journal, the paper was under review for 6 months, nothing was coming, not even the first revision or revise or whatever. I wrote to the editor, nothing happened. Then I was angry, that was my first paper. And I wrote it to the publication house, another person who is above the editor, designation wise. Believe me or not, within 2 hours the paper came to me, within 2 hours, and saying your paper is rejected. Right? So don't challenge the editor. If you cannot handle a question, you give reasons, but that the question itself is wrong is a challenge. Right or wrong, editors don't like it. And the associate editor, which I have not mentioned. Associate editors are equally powerful as editor, because editor will often listen to the associate editor. They want them, not us. The editor needs the journal, reviewers, the associate editor. They don't want us as co-authors. Don't upload your working paper on SSRN, which I follow. Again, up to you. I don't upload it. Don't say what the research limitations are unless you have already worked on them. Here you can be very philosophical. Research limitation is where I go very philosophical about what can be done, what are the mistakes I have done in my paper. Be very philosophical, which are good things on the paper, but not for practice. I never tell real research limitations, right? So that's it, all from me. End with a provo. So thank you very much, Guru sir, and thank you everyone for inviting me here. If you have any questions after this talk, whenever, please, I'll share my email IDs, those who want it, and we can have a chat. Thank you so much.
Sir, kindly be Please be seated.
So, first of all, I would like to thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, first of all, I would like to thank you for the wonderful presentation. It was really okay. Sir, sorry. My name is Vishnu. I am from Central University of Kerala. I'm a PhD research scholar there. It's been 8 months now. Okay. Thanks for the very informative and wonderful. It was really enlightening. I just have a doubt. Suppose you submit a paper for a journal, particular journal, and got rejected. Are you allowed to submit the same paper in some other journal?
Yes, yes.
You can.
Very much. But if the paper is rejected with a review, and if the review has logic in it, then please try to address to some of the real concerns of that particular thing. So do not just resubmit it. If there is a chance to work on that paper because the review is positive or the review is logical and they have really identified some flaws in that, maybe work on some of the key flaws if they're addressable within a short span of time and then resubmit it. You cannot resubmit to the same journal, but definitely other journals.
Oh, once it's rejected, I can't. Okay. No matter what.
No matter what.
I see.
Unless it's a reject and resubmit.
Pardon, sir?
Reject and resubmit. Sometimes some journals say this paper is rejected, but they are giving a scope to resubmit it, given some fallacies are addressed. Okay. They are now inviting you to resubmit. So that's called a reject and resubmit. There you should definitely resubmit. Okay. But if it is a rejection, then you cannot work on that paper and send it to the same journal, because that the decision for that paper is final.
Is there any limitations to the number of submissions, like say if it's
in that journal?
Yeah.
That's a good question. And I try to avoid at least, I try to give a gap of at least 6 to 8 months of sending another paper in the same journal. If the paper is rejected, okay. If my last paper was rejected, okay. But if my last paper is accepted, for example, you will see 2 JBR articles published in a gap of 1 year. So the reason behind is journals think that we have taken them for a ride. Right? So that respect is important. Means you should not send, and I have seen at the same time 3 articles of one author is in one journal. So that is a practice I try to avoid, because journals think that we are not that easily accessible. Right? So maybe 6 to 8 months gap, or maybe a year gap of sending that some other article in the journal, given that your earlier paper was accepted. If your earlier paper was rejected and you are sending another paper to the journal, that's okay. That you can send within 3 months, maybe some other journal, some other article in the same journal.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, this is Dr. Usha from Bangalore Rama University of Applied Sciences, where you spoke about the studies during the sessions. When it comes to develop a paper based on the studies, are we supposed to use the time series like time gap while we conduct one study with the same set of samples, or are we going to, should we use other set of samples for each hypothesis that we develop?
Yeah, that is the second part is correct. So it's not a time gap with the same, it's not a panel data that you are working on. If required, you can do it, but if it is a cross-sectional research design, your overall research design is cross-sectional, then these studies are supposed to validate different hypotheses with different samples.
Okay.
Even if you are validating or revalidating the same hypothesis, you can work with another sample. So let's say I want to understand the impact of financial well-being on healthy financial behavior for students in study 1. And I want to understand again the impact of healthy financial well-being on healthy financial behavior on early career professionals and mid-career professionals in study 2.
Okay.
And these 2 studies can actually go on parallelly with 2 different cohorts.
Okay. Ultimately, we are going to present the comparative analysis of the same assumed hypothesis.
Either a comparative analysis or a revalidation of the second study on top of the first study. So you say study 1 examined and found out a positive impact of healthy financial well-being on healthy financial behavior for a student cohort. But however, this impact can be generalized because in study 2 we use different cohorts and this relationship holds true.
All right. Thank
Am I
you,
answering
sir.
your question?
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm Mallikarjunappa, professor in this institute. One of the research, what is not a research gap you highlighted, working on a new geography or a place. Somebody worked on this same issue in US and therefore I'm working on this because of the different setting. Normally the researcher puts the different settings and then different circumstances under which somebody is working. This is one of the most popular gaps. But then in your presentation you are saying if you are finding out the same thing that somebody else has found in, let's say, US and you are reiterating in the Indian context, it's not a publishable work. I entirely agree with that. But the problem with the researchers is how will we come to know that the findings are same as that of, let's say, somebody who has found these things in US. They take 1 year, 2 years to collect the data, and the data reiterates some of the findings of the US. So this is the dilemma that a researcher will encounter. So how do we address
what
this?
I mean to say is, in the ideation, in the hypothesis stage itself, you have to say that this study is extended in Indian context, albeit with different set of contradictory hypotheses. So in the hypothesis stage itself, you are going to say that we are extending it, but simply we are not testing the positive impact of X on Y. Rather, we are saying that we are hypothesizing that X, the impact of X on Y was positive in US. However, in Indian context, we include one moderator, or we say that this impact of X and Y actually nullifies or becomes negative, even reverses. So it is not that after the data was analyzed, you get contradictory findings that the paper is acceptable. What I mean to say is, in the ideation stage, on the hypothesis development stage itself, if we are using a past framework or a past research question or a past relationship, your hypothesis has to have some new elements in it, maybe some moderator. You are saying X impacted Y positively in US. We want to understand whether X impacts Y in India also, and whether it is positive given the presence of another moderator, which was not studied in US. So it's before hypothesis and data collection stage rather than after the analysis. And then obviously after the analysis, then we cannot wait to say that the paper can be accepted because it has contradictory findings.
Anybody else has any questions? Yeah, we are nearing. Yes.
We have come to the end of this workshop. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Tathagata Ghosh for sharing his valuable insights. I'm very sure all the researchers who are a part of this session are indeed the biggest beneficiaries. Thank you so much, sir. I now request Professor Dr. Gururaj H. Kiriyur to hand over a memento to Dr. Ghosh as a token of appreciation. Thank you, sir. I would also like to thank the audience for your patience and interest. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. This is Shama Dayanan signing off for a day. Over to Dr. Sudhir Rajkesu.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to everybody here. There will be a short and beautiful cultural program here that would be displayed by our students, and it will take just 30 minutes from this point of time, here only. Now itself, we are going to have the cultural program. I request all of you to stay back for this beautiful cultural program. this is a Desi cultural program by our MBAs, and it will take just 30 minutes. Exactly.